Phoenix is known for its urban sprawl, but not everything about it is bad. Let's talk about the pros and cons of life in the suburbs. The population here in Phoenix is over 5 million people now. All of them have to live somewhere, and this huge growth in population led to urban sprawl and the notion of drive until you qualify, which led people to drive further and further from the center of town in order to find less expensive housing. There's an argument to be made about whether this is a good or a bad thing, but having lived here in the Phoenix suburbs myself for most of my adult life, I've grown to like it, but there are some downsides too. The suburbs here in Phoenix are typically a newer city. This led to neighborhoods that were well thought out, have a lot of amenities available, like local neighborhood parks, pathways throughout the neighborhoods that lead to these parks and to local schools, plus a lot of open space and opportunities for recreation. The neighborhoods here are not just rows and rows of similar houses that all look the same. Yeah, they're pretty homogeneous, but a lot of thought was put into the layout of the streets in order to break up the flow of traffic and not have long stretches where cars can get going at very high speeds. This leads to a very kid-friendly and family-friendly neighborhood where there is the opportunity to play outside and not have to worry about traffic or cars that are speeding down the block in your neighborhood. Homeowners associations are a fact of life here in the Phoenix suburbs. I think there's a lot of value to them, but there's a lot of people that don't see it that way and feel like they're an encroachment on the freedom to do what you want to do with your property. It can go both ways. Yes, the rules provide limits on the colors that you can paint your house or what plants you can plant in the front yard, but I've seen what can happen with no rules in neighborhoods that don't have an HOA. I've pulled up to show a house and the neighbor has 2 shipping containers in their front yard. I've also seen some wild colors on houses too. Most of the Phoenix metro area is laid out with the surface streets in a grid system where the streets run north, south, east, and west and are all 1 mile apart. This makes it much easier to get around, plus the major intersections are zoned commercial, which means that you're not too far away from the things that you need during your daily life. There's also a large network of loop highways throughout the valley. The Loop 101 circles Phoenix and most of the north and west part of town, while the 202 loops around the East Valley from the downtown area. There's also the Loop 303, which connects Interstate 17 north of town to Interstate 10 on the west side of town. No matter which suburb community you live in, you are not very far from a freeway that provides easy access to downtown, Sky Harbor Airport, or the other communities here in the valley. One thing I hear quite often about Phoenix is it lacks diversity, culture, and character. One byproduct of the newer suburb communities is many of the eating and shopping options are franchises. This makes sense. Large development companies want to work with tenants that they know will pay the rent, so they make deals with national chains. This doesn't mean there are no locally owned businesses. We're beginning to see several of the well-known local restaurateurs expanding into suburban locations that had been avoided before. There are great local options in every part of town. They may take a bit of work to find, or they may be drowned out by the standard franchise option. I know that I mentioned before that I feel like HOAs can provide value for a community, but they can also have their downsides too. There's something about being elected to an HOA board that brings out the worst in some people. They get a taste of that position of authority and they want to flex that power. I've heard horror stories of communities with residents walking in the streets with pen and pad in hand, looking for any and all violation. In the name of continuity, most are restrictive on the colors you can paint your house. I can argue that this leads to some stability when it comes to home values, but it is also very restrictive. Parking is another issue that people complain about quite often, and I've experienced it firsthand. The HOA in my community only allows for parking on the street if your driveway and your garage are full, even though it's legal to park on the street. We have a blended family with 5 kids, and most of them are of driving age now, so we have a lot of cars at our house, and a lot of nights we have a car parked on the street. So if I get up in the morning, technically when I leave, I'm supposed to move one of the cars from the street back into my spot, and then either park on the street or swap them again when I get back. And for short trips, it just isn't practical. So it's a very frustrating rule. And honestly, I feel like the managers are starting to give a little bit of slack. I've received notices for it in the past, but I haven't received one, or I haven't heard from any of my neighbors that have received them recently either. So definitely something that's very frustrating when it comes to the parking. Yes, we do have an extensive system of highways here that provide easy access to other parts of the valley, but that doesn't mean we are not without our rush hour traffic. Many of the suburb communities have very heavy traffic flow out of the area in the morning and then back again in the evening. All of these people leaving and returning at about the same time leads to some traffic headaches. If you're considering a move here to the Phoenix area, I get emails and texts and phone calls from people every week that are just like you, considering a move here and are unsure of what part of town might be best for them. Feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear about your situation and see how I can help you decide which part of town is best for you.